Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Contemporaneous Caleb, and today I will be responsible for giving you the weird news. And our starting theme is going to be the fact that people in 2020 are clearly headed nowhere. It's just not a year for progress, and there's a couple stories today that reflect that very clearly, also in hilarious manners, which I'm all for, of course. So we're going to start off that theme by talking about tickets that sold out in 10 minutes in Australia, which were selling 7-hour flights to nowhere. And then once we are done with all the stories that fit into that theme, we will move into the weird news crime stories of the week, and there's some pretty outlandish ones this week, including an Omaha man who was accused of leaving a fake bomb outside of a courthouse, as well as 232 pounds of marijuana, about 400 grand in unmarked bills, 12 pounds of THC wax, 227 grams of MDMA, which is ecstasy, I believe, along with a few other outlandish things. And then in my final segment, we will do my top 10 failed apocalyptic predictions. Those are going to be really fun. Basically, the whole hour is going to be dedicated to making fun of idiots, and I cannot wait to get to it. And we are going to start off with the tickets that sell out in 10 minutes for Australia Airlines' scenic 7-hour flight to nowhere. So this occurred from Australian air carrier Qantas, who recently announced that it will be taking travel-hungry passengers on 7-hour scenic flights to, quote, nowhere, as coronavirus travel restrictions remain in effect. And as previously mentioned, once released, these tickets sold out in 10 minutes. The idea is for the flight to provide passengers with a low-level scenic view of some of Australia's most popular vacation destinations, which includes the Great Barrier Reef and the Uluru. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure it's super interesting. There were 134 available seats on the Boeing 7087 flight, all of which have been purchased. And these were not cheap tickets. For the 7-hour-long journey, each one was priced at between $575 and $2,765, depending on the class of seating. And when asked about the ticket sales, one spokesperson for the airline said, quote, it's possibly the fastest-selling flight in Qantas history. People clearly miss travel and the experience of flying. If the demand is there, we will definitely look at doing more of these scenic flights while we all wait for borders to open. So basically it's like those old screensavers where it's just a logo bouncing around your screen. The flights are just going to go in the air and fly around aimlessly pretty much. But obviously there's a market for it, and in fact, as a result of the fantastic response to this airline, Taiwan and Japan are now offering similar sightseeing flights in an effort to provide citizens with the pleasure of, quote, air travel, as well as help with the steep revenue decline that has been impacting the travel industry as a whole. So if you didn't know what to do with your stimulus check, now you do. Alright, next story. And this one has a very similar theme to it. $1,400 overalls with fake grass stains, being sold by the one and only Gucci store. Now, of course, when it comes to useless things that are extraordinarily expensive, designer clothes kind of have a corner in that market. There was a big debacle several years ago when a company, I think it was called Moschino, was releasing a clear see-through dress that kind of was made of the same material as a dry cleaning bag. And then there was the sterling silver tin can that was sold by Tiffany & Company for, I think, $1,000. But beating all of those out is Gucci's new fake grass stain overalls for $1,400. The luxury brand boasts that it is, quote, eco-washed organic denim overalls, which are made from organic cotton, quote, specifically treated for a stained-like distressed effect. And when asked what the hell they were thinking, they replied that they were going for what they call a, quote, grunge vibe. The description of the jeans goes on to read, quote, Gucci explores new takes on the cult fabric. They have already lost me. They go on to say, quote, reinterpreting it with different designs and washing techniques that blur the line between vintage and contemporary. And then when asked what separates their product from just raggedy old overalls with stains on them, Gucci said, oh, it has the Gucci logo sewn on the back pocket. Which is actually a pretty good argument. It's hard to debate with that one. Who does any grass staining activities wearing overalls? This is all very confusing to me, but that's fine. I have a very simple mind. Now, most importantly of all is the social media response to this fiasco. And it was not positive, although it was funny. Some of the best among them are, quote, my farmer grandpa is at the height of fashion and he doesn't even know it. Now everybody can go around looking like they've mowed their lawn. And the most clever one, perhaps, quote, since when is a grass stain effect so valuable? Probably since a shutdown that limits the time you can spend outdoors. And the most upvoted one of all was, I hate capitalism. Which I personally disagree with. I think this is genius. Because I think everybody would be better off if the kind of people who would buy grass-stained overalls had $1,400 less. I think that would make the world a better place. But a little heads up, if you can't afford the $1,400 overalls, Gucci is also selling a pair of grass-stained jeans in the United Kingdom for only $770, so you can go ahead and empty your child's college fund onto those pair of jeans. Alright, our next story about the 2020 sellouts. This one's less of a sellout story and just a lack of progress story. A missing fisherman who was once the trigger of a record-breaking search was found and then went missing again. Earlier this month, a pair of fishermen went missing in the cold, wild waters of the Great Australian Bight, which triggered a search that lasted 5 days. The search was the largest in the state of South Australia's history, and it eventually located the pair of fishermen drifting with a damaged propeller. Thankfully, they were uninjured and in relatively good spirits. But now, less than 2 weeks later, the same boat has been reported missing, along with at least one of the two men. Poor fellow. He's the only guy who's ever almost died fishing twice. Because very few people almost die while fishing. This is such a lame joke. You know, like lake fishers, people who fish in lakes, they don't die very often. And then there's the people who fish for crabs on the open seas, and they die like every 5 minutes. So it's good to see that there's a happy medium of people almost dying. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. Police received a call from the 57-year-old missing man at about 5 a.m. last Tuesday, reporting that he was taking on water near Granite Island off Victor Harbor. And thus, authorities subsequently launched another search operation, deploying a rescue helicopter and a sea rescue, which was filled with many volunteers, many of which took part in his previous recovery mission. But the sad news is they have yet to locate the vessel. The 57-year-old man who owns the boat and has been living on board since the last rescue operation ran around in Victor Harbor on Saturday after trying to bring the vessel ashore during a low tide. It wasn't until the tide rolled back in that he came unstuck, and eventually able to tie the 30-foot wooden-hulled fishing boat to the wharf at Granite Island. But it's no longer there. Maybe just take the month off, buddy. The causeway at Granite Island was closed the day before due to dangerously high winds in excess of 100 kilometers per hour. Good gravy. Quote, when I got down here, nobody could see the boat. according to a freelance video journalist, otherwise known as an unemployed man. It went on to say, quote, "The police went out of the causeway. Nobody could see him. They tried to phone him back. No answer. So the answer to this question is nobody knows. They said there's nothing out there, and we don't know where he is." Police Commissioner Grant Stevens confirmed that police were, quote, "certainly doing what we can to identify his current location. That's what we're obliged to do." He went on to say, quote, "It does not come cheaply. These efforts always come at a cost to the community, but we have an obligation to ensure the safety of everybody, and we will be doing that today." Now, look, I'm all for helping people out, but why don't you let the people who decide to go fishing in 100 kilometer per hour wind live with their life decisions? Especially if this is the second time it's happening in a month. Less than 2 weeks ago, on the morning of September 10th, the 57-year-old man and his 48-year-old partner were rescued 100 kilometers from their intended destination. Yikes, that's a long distance. The men explained that they had had issues with their propeller and had been forced to drift past their intended port of call, and claimed to have no idea that authorities had been searching for more than 103,000 square kilometers trying to find them. For restitution, he was fined $1,000. The biggest search in Australian history, and he was fined $1,000 for it. $1 for each man searching for him. Afterwards, South Australian police found that he didn't have an appropriate recreational boat license. So that's actually where the $1,000 came from. He was fined for having an out-of-date emergency position indicator radio beacon. Nobody really knows what will occur once he is found again, but for some reason they seem fairly confident that they will find the man, and let's all hope they do. Alright, we're going to end with my last story about people losing their sense of progress. Spain triathlete gives up medal to rival who went the wrong way. A Spanish athlete is being applauded on social media after he sacrificed a top-tier win in the 2020 Santander Triathlon to give it up to a competitor who took a wrong turn on the course. British athlete James Teagle was on course to win a third-place award in the competition in Spain last weekend when he made a mistake meters from the finish. That was when a man named Diego Mentrida overtook him in the race, but noticed the error and stopped to allow Teagle to cross first. Quote, "He deserved it." Now, due to the positive reception of Mentrida giving up his third place trophy, he was awarded an honorary third place prize by the organizers and the same €300 prize money as the man he let pass him. Mentruda wrote on Instagram, quote, "This is something my parents and my club taught me since I was a child. In my view, it should be a normal thing to do." As for the man who took a wrong turn, he said that he mistakenly ran towards spectators in a fenced area. In other words, he ran into a fence. Quote, "He didn't notice the signs, or they were misaligned." It was then that Montreda noticed that his opponent had taken a wrong turn by running into the fence. And he decided to slow down and let his rival pass him. He said, quote, "When I saw that he had missed the route, I just stopped. James deserved this medal." And obviously this got much appraisal, including from the race winner, Javier Gomez, who said, quote, "It was the best gesture in history." I think that might be a little exaggerated, but perhaps he's exaggerating to clarify. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Now, the only problem with this is that the video is online, and you can go and take a look at it. I encourage you to do so. It's not entirely clear that either man was ahead of the other before the one fellow took the wrong turn by running into a fence. So I'm not sure it was entirely fair that he ended up getting third even though the other fellow didn't run into a fence. But perhaps that's just my dark, cynical outlook on life in general. Alright, so in the next segment we're going to go over some failed crime stories, and as well as some just basic weird news stories. including a British policeman who freed another man from handcuffs after his girlfriend lost the key. And then we'll also get to the Omaha man who was accused of leaving a fake bomb outside of his courthouse, along with many, many kilos of drugs. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a swell old time.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, where police free a man from handcuffs after his girlfriend lost the key. So this occurred on September 18th, when British police responded to an early morning call from a man who became trapped in a pair of handcuffs, and an innocent case of romance gone awry. I don't know if innocent's the right word to use for that. The Greater Manchester Police Station said that officers responded at about 4:30 a.m., which is the perfect time to enact such filthy activities. And the department described the call in a tweet, quote, "A male phoned requesting help as his girlfriend had locked him in some handcuffs and they couldn't now find the key. He wanted police as he feared the fire brigade would cut them and they were expensive." The police went on to say that he was released from the cuffs, but the department did not say whether the expensive restraints were damaged during the rescue. I'm kind of curious as to why they blame the girlfriend for this. She lost the key during their romantic activities, but the chances of her wearing anything with pockets on it is pretty low. So chances are it would have been very difficult not to lose the key, if you ask me. Alright, next story. An Oregon man allegedly shot himself in the groin while showing off his gun in a supermarket. So the Oregon man who was in line at a Lincoln City supermarket accidentally shot himself in the groin because he was flaunting his handgun, and according to reports, he just barely missed hitting his femoral artery, which would have been devastating. Police said that the 29-year-old accidentally pulled the trigger of a Glock 9mm while putting the firearm back into his pants. The shot reportedly entered through his groin and exited his thigh. This is why I tell everybody who wants to carry never to carry with a chambered round, because you're always just 3 pounds of pressure in the wrong direction away from shooting yourself, or even worse, shooting somebody else, which is a bad thing. Fox 12 reported on the incident, which occurred inside McKay's Market in Lincoln City, while the man was showing off a gun to his friend who he brought along for his little shopping spree. The 29-year-old was taken to an area hospital and then flown to Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center in Portland for further treatment. Quote, "The man did not have a concealed handgun license, and his act was found to be reckless," since it placed several people in danger. It was found to be reckless. They had to investigate more before figuring out, oh, maybe he shouldn't show off his Glock 9mm to his friend while in line at the supermarket. Also, not having a concealed handgun license is a pretty big deal. So I'm pretty sure this guy might find himself doing some time in prison. Of course, after he gets out of the hospital. Alright, this next story is a bit stressful and it's kind of long. So just get ready for that one. I kind of enjoy it still. The gig economy company launches an Uber-like subsidiary, but it's designed for evicting people. So this is a smaller company called Civil, and they're enacting what they call the, quote, fastest growing money-making gig due to COVID-19. They went on to say, since COVID-19, many Americans fall behind in all aspects. The advertisement here is that it's profitable to, quote, be hired as an eviction crew. So during a time of great economic and general hardship, Civil aims to be essentially Uber, but for evicting people. That must have been a great business pitch. Seizing on the pandemic-driven nosedive in both employment and wages, as well as the huge uptick in the number of people who simply can't pay their rent, Civil aims to make it easy for landlords to hire process servers and eviction agents as gig workers. And it was then that a Chicago-based paralegal, who often participates in housing activism, saw the post on Craigslist asking for contractors to join the Civil program, and she started speaking out against it. Quote, "It is effed up that there will be struggling working-class people who will be drawn to gigs like furniture hauling or process serving for a company like Civil, evicting fellow working class people from their homes so they can themselves make rent." And in the actual Craigslist ad, which you can go view online, I think it's been taken down since, but you should be able to find it somewhere, Civil explains that the opportunity plainly says, quote, "There is plenty of work to do in the dismal economy. Unemployment is at a record high, and many cannot or simply are not paying rent and mortgages. We are being contracted by frustrated property owners and banks to secure foreclosed residential properties." Civil aims to marry the gig economy with the devastation of a pandemic, complete with signature gig startup language like, quote, "be your own boss," and, quote, "flexible hours," along with, quote, "looking for self-motivated individuals with positive attitudes. Fastest growing money-making gig due to COVID-19. And last but not least, quote, "literally thousands of process servers are needed in the coming months due to courts being backed up in judgments that need to be served to defendants." And then they go on to take a semi-political stance, quote, "Too many people stopped paying rent and mortgages thinking they would not be evicted." And unfortunately, the company has not responded to any requests for comment or a source for the quote previously mentioned, but their website is still up and running, and so if you require their services, you can go on there. Many people accuse this company of simply being a little prank show, perhaps, but it is actually connected to a larger and real gig economy company called OnCall, which is probably pronounced on-call, isn't it, Caleb, you stupid head? Okay. OnCall describes itself as an app that provides on-demand task services to, quote, non-urban communities beyond main city areas. OnCall is the developer behind other more believable TaskRabbit-esque apps like Lawn Fixer, Clean Quick, or Move Quick. And it should be noted that given the fact that Civil is in advertising all over the country and that OnCall, though not popular, does exist as an actual company, it appears that through Civil, OnCall is doing an actual attempt to simplify the process of evicting people who cannot pay their rent during a pandemic. This story went pretty viral over the weekend, and in response, famous rapper and actor and all-around philanthropist Ice-T said, quote, "OnCall is basically Uber for side job hustles. You dig it?" And he also did not respond to a request for comment. And it's not just gaining negative attention from celebrities and news media sites. It is also gaining negative reception from the people who actually applied to the Civil app. So if you go on the Google Play Store or the App Store, you will see that it has very, very low stars, abysmal reviews. Users often complain about a hidden $35 enrollment fee before having a lack of work once signed up for the app. And of course, both Civil and OnCall have not responded to any requests for comment on the situation. More interestingly, though, there has been a federal ban on evictions for several months now declared by the CDC, but it is no secret that landlords are still attempting to press on. And there is actually a penalty for violating the ban at the moment, which can include a combination of fines and jail time. Civil did not respond to a question about how the company ensures evictions are legal, though based on a terms of service put out by the company, it appears to pass all risk onto the companies using its platforms, stating that it simply, quote, provides lead generation to independent contractors and does not carry out the actual work itself. When asked what he thought about the situation, an eviction prevention specialist told Vice, quote, we've seen more than double the amount of calls to our hotline since the beginning of March, and we did during the same time period last year. He went on to say about the company Civil, it is very dishonest. Quote, it's like, oh, don't call us a hitman. We don't pull the trigger. We just connect you with somebody who's willing to. So you're probably wondering how so many people get around the CDC moratorium on evictions. And this is actually because many tenants are not aware that they need to sign a declaration form to prevent getting evicted. There are many ways to do this, but most tenants are not aware of that. The eviction specialist went on to say, quote, one thing we know just from experience, especially with housing, just because something is technically legal doesn't by any stretch mean that it's right, ethically speaking. With this particular company, it sounds like they're doing what landlords often do, which is prey upon a lack of knowledge and information about people's rights. Legal court evictions are on hold, but most of these management companies, they're not necessarily evicting people through courts. They're just evicting people through pressure. So that's why I see companies like this would be coming in. And their final quote, civil marketing language that portrays underwater tenants and homeowners as scammers looking for an excuse to skip out on their obligations is not the only faculty that is inaccurate, but it also plays into a general victim-blaming PR myth perpetuated by the real estate industry to justify their explorative business practices. I think he meant to say exploitative, but whatever. He wraps up by saying, quote, a frank admission that our housing system is in a system predicated on violence. So yeah, he's not too happy about this civil company. Lots of people aren't. Why don't you guys rage in the discussion forums and let me know what you think? Do you think the owners of the property have rights to the property or the people living in the property? Alright, we have time, thankfully, for one more short story. A town of asbestos is back to the drawing board after lackluster response to renaming options. So the actual town's name is Asbestos, who is now reviewing the suggestions it received from its new name poll after lackluster response from residents over the top 4 picks. After 1,000 suggestions were received since the town named after the mineral that was once a source of pride, the city announced that it is now seeking a new name. Once a major exporter of asbestos, the town's mine stopped operation nearly 10 years ago. Use of the mineral is now banned in most countries due to carcinogenic fibers that it can release into the air. One councilman member said, quote, the town received a little bit of everything in their request for help in finding a new name, along with the town's Social Acceptability Committee and the Quebec Commission responsible for the place names. Those suggestions were whittled down to 4 choices. The first, Jeffrey, named after the asbestos mine. Jeffrey, Quebec, that would be the best thing ever. Number 2, Phoenix, symbolizing the town's rebirth. That's sweet. Apollon, named after an endangered turtle species. And Trois-Lacs, which is merged of the town of Asbestos in 1999. Yeah, Jeffrey, Quebec is definitely the best out of those 4. Ever since those 4 choices were unveiled, however, the council members say that they have been hearing less than enthusiastic feedback from those who actually live in the town. She went on to say that speaking with residents and looking at conversations on social media is prompting the town council to revisit other suggestions. Quote, we have to make sure that we offer a diversity in the choices so people can relate. And then she added that the pandemic made it more difficult to communicate the selection process with residents. However, the residents are also complaining that its current name of Asbestos is making it harder to do business with other cities. And in the most Canadian response ever, another councilman said, quote, "We are disappointed for the other choices that we have, but that's okay. We'll change the name, so that's good." He went on to say that the town has lots of suggestions to work from, and they are trying to find the best that residents can be proud of. Quote, "It's not every day that a city changes its name. We don't have a manual or a guide to help us, so we go as we think." So you can go on Asbestos' website and send in what you think would be a good new name for their city. I'm still upset they didn't go with Jeffrey. Alright, that's it for this segment. Stay tuned to the next one where we have probably the weirdest weird news stories of the week, including the man who had a fake bomb outside of his courthouse with all of his many, many drugs, as mentioned before. We will go into that, as well as a suspect that was in a chipmunk outfit when it robbed a Valley Platte pharmacy. And a firefighter who goes viral debunking wildfire conspiracies, which will be excellent fun. And then stay tuned to the last segment where I will give you my top 10 failed apocalypses. Stay tuned for all of that and more.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, where a suspect in a chipmunk outfit robs a Valley Platte pharmacy, and he did so at gunpoint last weekend. According to the sheriff's office, the robbery happened around noon last Saturday at the Medicine Chest Pharmacy. The sheriff said that surveillance video showed the armed suspect running from the store's parking lot to the rear door of the store, forcing an employee back inside. Once inside, according to the sheriff's office, the suspect escorted the employee through the store at gunpoint as she filled his bag with an undisclosed amount of narcotic medication. He then walked out of the rear door of the store and ran westbound towards a nearby apartment complex. So, if you see a chipmunk running around with illegal drugs, call your local sheriff's department. I'm sure they'd be glad to hear it. Alright, next story. A firefighter goes viral debunking wildfire conspiracies on TikTok. The man's name is Michael Clark, and I'm only mentioning him because he is a god-dang national hero fighting these fires. And he made a quite viral TikTok video debunking popular myths and misinformation about the wildfires, spreading all over the West Coast. The video is a duet with another TikToker's video in the left-hand corner, blah blah blah. While that video perpetuates the conspiracy theories, Clark casually debunks them on the right side of the screen. It goes down like this. The other user, hinting the wildfires were planned, says, quote, "Is it not weird to you guys to know that the fires know when to stop at the border?" And then Clark, the firefighter, shakes his head and says, quote, "Because it's a U.S. database map you're looking at. Not going to be reporting the Canada fires." And, of course, just after one night of being uploaded, it gained millions of views across multiple social media platforms. And in response, the young man said, "I've seen bizarre wildlife conspiracies before, but this one stuck out to me." And it also bothered him that the other user had a verified account on TikTok with about 2 million followers. and the fact that he was pushing out so much misinformation just seemed downright irresponsible. Quote, I don't want anyone to think of her in a bad way, but just with how much followers and influencers she has, I didn't want people to take this and run with it. He went on to admit that he is a lot more interesting to watch theories than just the facts, but with everything going on right now, the wildfires, the COVID-19 pandemic, and more, the firefighter said the last thing people need is more misinformation being spread. The biggest thing to do is simply check your facts. He went on to say, quote, that's my biggest advice, is just to do your own research. Obviously, fires aren't stopping at the borders. And since the uploads, he has learned the nickname, the Hot Firefighter. I'm going to stay out of that one. But what I will weigh in on is if you want to go see the entire video, you can go online and check it out. It's only about a minute long. It's very entertaining. And it's just generally fun to make fun of conspiracy-minded people. But we're going to go ahead and move on and make some drug addicts. So an Omaha man accused of leaving a fake bomb outside of a courthouse is held on a $2 million bond. So this 25-year-old was accused of leaving a fake bomb outside of the Douglas County Courthouse last Friday. Since then, he has been put on a $1 million bond for the bomb threat, as well as a $1 million bond for the drug charges. In a statement issued Monday afternoon, investigators detailed the contents of the man's house and car. Just looking at a photo of the evidence, it's pretty devastating. Just an office table completely filled with $100 bills, and then another room which is completely filled with drugs. And I am now going to read off a list of what was found by the authorities. 232 pounds of marijuana, $400,000 in cash in his car, and $16,000 in cash at his residence. At least 12 pounds of suspected THC wax in his car, and 2,000 grams of THC wax at his home. 227 grams of MDMA, also known as ecstasy or Molly, as well as scales for weighing the narcotics. And most importantly of all, none of the packages are suspected narcotics are affixed with a tax stamp. I like how they point that out as though it's the most tragic part of this story. On Friday afternoon, the suspect, identified as Wabababwa, was seen leaving the Douglas County Courthouse after conducting business. As he left, surveillance video revealed him shocking evidence that he knocked over a no smoking sign, then proceeded to park in a car facing the wrong way in a construction zone, and then driving down the intersection of the 18th and Harney. That's a really odd detail. He then placed 2 boxes outside of the courthouse and drove away. The area was evacuated, and the Omaha Police Department's bomb squad evaluated the scene. There were no explosives discovered in the boxes, but the threat alone has landed the man an extra $1 million on his bond. And I am sad to say that's all we have for that story. I was hoping there would be some policeman quotes, but whatever, we'll just have to move on and live with the fact that this man was dealing a lot of illegal drugs and making a lot of money off of it, but he will now be paying the price. Speaking of paying the price, a surfer lost his surfboard in Hawaii, and then it reappeared in the Philippines more than 5,000 miles away. The man who lost his surfboard in the huge swells off of Hawaii was amazed to discover that it had been found in the Philippines, 5,200 miles away. The photographer and surfer who lives in Hawaii lost his board in February of 2018, according to an account posted on his Facebook page. Quote, I was really upset as I managed to catch the biggest wave of my life on this board. That's why it meant so much to me. The man had hoped a local fisherman might find the board, or that it might wash up in Kauai, which he'd heard was possible landing spot for lost boards, but he never thought it would turn up in the Philippines, this 5,200 miles away. He went on to explain that the new owner had bought it from a local fisherman to learn how to surf, before contacting the Hawaii-based boarder shaper Lyle Carson on Facebook. Quote, as bummed as I was when I lost it, now I am happy to know that my board fell into the hands of somebody wanting to learn the sport. And the board's new guardian, his name is Giovanni, who was a primary school teacher in the southern Philippines. He bought the board for just $40 from a local fisherman who had found it in August 2018, 6 months after it had escaped from its original owner. The board had turned up pale blue instead of a yellowish color due to the voyage across the Pacific, but the name Lyle Carson is still visible. The new owner contacted the old one, who altered the title of ownership. Who cares? Quote, "It turned out it's a surfboard from Hawaii. I couldn't believe it myself," said the Filipino, who told AFP, quote, "It's been my dream to learn to surf and ride the big waves here. For now, I can use his surfboard. I told him I will take good care of it." The original owner said that he would have gone to visit the new Filipino owner if it weren't for coronavirus travel restrictions, but he is now raising money to spend the aspiring surfer some gear and some reading material to help his students learn English. Isn't that sweet? The pair are now in contact online, and the two plan to visit each other when they can receive the authority to transport themselves. That's a really odd way to word the allowance of travel, but whatever. And it's said that in the long run, the Filipino gentleman will likely give back the surfboard to the Hawaii local. The original owner said, quote, "It was my first big wave surfboard, custom shaped for myself. I surfed it on the biggest days I've ever surfed in my life. It's an excuse for me to go to the Philippines and visit and basically complete the story. I think it would be a great ending to teach him how to surf." Isn't that fine? Fine and dandy. We have an odd story. An old TV caused a village broadband to experience an outage for 18 months. So an unnamed householder in Abhauersen, which is my weekly mispronunciation of the week, was unaware that his old TV set would emit a signal which would interfere with the entire village's broadband signal. After 18 months, engineers began an investigation after a cable replacement program failed to fix the issue. The embarrassed householder promised not to use the television again. The village now has a stable broadband signal. That's hilarious. OpenReach engineers were baffled by the continuous problem, and it wasn't until they used a monitoring device that they had found that the TV was at fault. The householder would switch their TV set on 7 a.m. every morning, and electrical interference emitted by the second-hand television was affecting the broadband signal. The owner, who does not want to be identified, was, quote, "mortified to find out their old TV has causing Ben problems." That's fine, it's English is hard. One of the engineers on the scene said, quote, "They immediately agreed to switch it off and not use it again." Yeah, that would be really awkward if somebody walked up to you and said, "Hey, your TV's making it so people can't get Netflix here." Engineers walked around the village with a monitor called a spectrum analyzer in order to find any electrical noise to help pinpoint the problem. Quote, "At 7 a.m. like clockwork, it happened. Our device picked up a large burst of electrical interference in the village. It turned out that at 7 a.m. every morning, the occupant would switch on their old TV, which would, in turn, knock out broadband for the entire village. The TV was found to be emitting a signal of high-level impulse noise, which causes electrical interference in other devices. The engineer said that the problem has not returned since the fault was identified. And the chief engineer for the Leeds in Wales said anything with electrical components, from outdoor lights to microwaves, can potentially have an impact on broadband connections. Quote, "We just advise the public to make sure that their electric appliances are properly certified and meet current British standards. And if you have a fault, report it to your service provider in the first instance so we can investigate." Alright, so unfortunately that is it for the weird news so far. Stay tuned to the next segment and I will give you my top 10 failed apocalyptic predictions, which I am excited for. I hope you are too, so stay tuned for that.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. Top 10 failed apocalyptic predictions. Number 10, the Great Disappointment, which is near and dear to my own heart. Between the years of 1831 and 1841, a man by the name of William Miller, a Baptist minister, predicted the return of Jesus Christ of Nazareth and the end of the world based on prophecies in the book of Daniel. Specifically, Daniel 8:14, if you want to follow along. Quote, "My principles in belief are that Jesus Christ will come again to this earth, cleanse, purify, and take possession of the same with all its saints, sometime between March 21st, 1843, and March 21st, 1844. That day came and went, and of course the Maralites kept their faith. After further discussion, the date of the end of the world was changed to April 18th. Again, the day came and went, and again the date was changed, this time to October 22nd, 1844. Miller continued to wait for the end of the world until his death in 1849. Little interesting fact for you, the Millerite religious movement eventually became the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They believed that the prediction was correct, but that it referred to an event in heaven, not on earth. They continue to believe that to this day, and members of the Baha'i faith also believe the prediction, and they think it's referring to the coming of a forerunner of their own religion, the Bab. And they're just like any religion, they had their own pamphlets, so you can go online and check out some pamphlets from some cultists from 1831, and they are quite hilarious. It goes into detail about how this particular passage in Daniel 8:14 describes just when and how the apocalypse will occur. It's very entertaining and silly. Just as silly as our number 9, Montanus. Montanus was an early heretic in Christianity who predicted that the end of times were upon the world. He joined with 2 prophetesses, just lady prophets. Not sure why they're not called prophets. And Montanus claimed to be the embodiment of the Holy Spirit and began to preach a third testament. His beliefs became fairly widespread and caused a great deal of confusion and dissent within the early Christian church. The Christian writer Tertullian rejected mainstream Christianity and converted to Montanism. Montanus was eventually condemned at the Council of Euphesius in 431 AD. And interesting fact for you, the Montanus thought that Turkey would become a, quote, New Jerusalem, and that all of Christianity would settle there before the final judgment. But that didn't go so well, did it? Number 8, Charles Wesley. Charles Wesley was one of the founders of the Methodist Church, and he believed that the world was going to end in 1794, which would have been a very peculiar time for the world to end. Everything was going great. Everything was already burning in revolution, and some places were even recovering from it. This view concurred with that of Shakers, who predicted that the year was also the end. That's the year 1794. Despite his error, Charles' brother John later made a prediction of the end of times. John predicted that in 1836 there would be a great beast which would come to Earth, marking the beginning of the end. So they're two very famous brothers who simultaneously predicted false apocalypses. And a fun fact on them, despite being a founding member of the Methodist Church, Charles Wesley begged the Anglican minister to bury him in an Anglican graveyard, stating, quote, "Sir, whatever the world may say of me, I have lived, and I die a member of the Church of England." What a fantastic person. Okay, number 6? Let's do something cosmological. 1910 Halley's Comet. This is the first of several cosmological predictions of the end that will be coming in this top 10. Now, even though Halley's Comet had been visible many times before without any reported deaths, the passing of the comet on May 18th, 1910 was thought to be a deathly threat to people because of poisonous gas coming from the comet's tail. It is not only religious misinterpretation that can cause apocalyptic panic, this may have been the first time science caused this grave fear. As many people said back then, that comets give off dangerous gases, which I'm not sure is true, but it certainly wouldn't end up on Earth. Comets don't get close to Earth. Another interesting fact, Mark Twain was born in 1835. Halley's Comet had made an appearance this same year. He has been quoted as having said he would, quote, "go out with Comet." And he died in April of 1910. What a goof. I love Mark Twain. We need to do another top 10 on a person. It would be fun. Number 5, Johanna Southcott. It's probably Joanna. Joanna Southcott was a self-proclaimed English mystic who was born in 1750 in what many people call the Dreadful Era. She was originally a Methodist, but she became convinced that she had supernatural powers. And she eventually declared herself the woman spoken of in the Apocalypse. She is referring, of course, to the King James Version of the Bible in Revelation 12, 1-6. Quote, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Thusly Joanna predicted that she would give birth to the Messiah, which would hail the end of the world on 19th October 1814. The world didn't end on that date, of course, but 2 months later it did end for Joanna, who died. Her followers kept her body in some time during the hopes that she would raise herself from the dead. They finally handed her over to the authorities when she began to decay quite disgustingly, according to the few records we have. Interesting fact on Joanna, she left behind a sealed box which she claims contained a series of prophecies. The box is not opened until the 24th Anglican bishops gather together for that purpose, and then and only then will Joanna's box have the secrets of the universe revealed. Alrighty then. Number 5. Let's put Y2K here, which all began as a giant scare when Nostradamus, arguably the best-known seer of all time, predicted that July of 1999 would be the chosen date of Armageddon. A, quote, "great king of terror was to descend from the sky." When that didn't come true, the doomsdayer began spreading rumors that the Cassian space probe was going to crash on Earth. I think he meant Cassian. The Cassian probe was filled with radioactive fuel. If this was spilled in a crash, it would fulfill the prediction in Revelation 8:11, quote, "and the name of the star is called Wormwood." Is called Wormwood, and the third part of waters become wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. That's the end of the quote. And of course, no one can forget the years leading up to 2000 in which the doomsdayers, the world over, predicted a catastrophe for man due to Y2K bug, which would infect all our computers, cause airplanes to fall out of the sky, cause robots to turn against man and kill them all, which some people still believe is happening, just slowly. And an interesting Nostradamus fact, Nostradamus was by profession an apothecary, which in modern terms is a pharmacist, which means he was probably on drugs all the time. Alright, number 4, Jehovah's Witness predictions. We had to do it. Prince's own religion. Jehovah's Witness religion was made a number of predictions about the end of the world, the first being in 1914, in which they based their prediction on prophecies from the book of Daniel, much like our number 10 seat. After the end did not come, of course, they changed the meaning of the prediction and stated that it was the date that Jesus would begin to rule invisibly. It's starting to make a lot of sense why this is Prince's religion. Well, was. Some other years that the group have predicted that the end of the world would come are in order: 1914, 1915, 1918, 1920, 1925, 1941, 1975, and 1994, etc. One member of the cult actually built a house for the Jewish prophets to live in when they returned to Earth as part of the end of times. Interesting fact, the founder of the cult sold miracle wheat, which was extremely inflated prices, obviously, promising that the wheat had miraculous proportions. I don't know what that means, but hey, to each his own, buddy. Alright, we have 3 more, and they're all cosmological. Isn't that fun? Number 3, the Jupiter effect. The Jupiter effect came out in 1974 and was written about by 2 astrophysicists, John Gribben and Stephen Plagman. It was about all 9 planets aligning on March 10th, 1982, which would create a gravitational pull that would cause a huge increase in sunspots, solar flares, and or earthquakes. Many credophiles, which is one who gets positive pleasure from a belief and pain from doubt, I don't know what any of that means, took this prediction as a prediction of the apocalypse, although Arthur Gribben even came out and said that it was a theoretical what if, without much of any real substance behind it at all, and yet people believed it was going to happen and it would not be deterred. And of course, while the effect did not cause a major catastrophe, there was some influence by the planets, with high tides circulating at 0.04 millimeters higher than normal. Not the apocalypse we were all looking forward to, but you gotta take what you can get, buddy. Alright, number 2, the Hale-Bopp Comet. The comet Hale-Bopp was visible to the naked eye for a record 18 months. Amateur astronomer Chuck Shamek observed a companion object following the comet. He then called the Art Bell radio show to report his findings. This led many to believe a variety of, quote, end-of-the-world theories. The internet helped spread the word even faster. The Heaven's Gate cult felt that this was their signal to commit mass suicide in the March of 1997. This cult believed that the companion object was a spacecraft coming to pick them up, only to be reached by the leaving their earthly vessels behind. You can watch a fascinating video clip of Heaven's Gate cult on YouTube. I highly recommend it, as well as any other documentaries about cults. Unfortunately, I can't give the name. Just search the Heaven's Gate cult documentary. It's super interesting to see how these people think. Alright, number 1, similar to the last 2, the planetary conjunction, which came from respected meteorologist Albert Porta, who predicted that on December 17, 1919, a conjunction of 6 planets would, quote, cause a magnetic current that would pierce the sun, cause a great explosion of flaming gas, and eventually engulf everything, including Earth. This prediction led to some mob violence and a few suicides. It also caused Albert to lose his job as a, quote, respected meteorologist, and he ended up working for a local paper writing the weather column. The study of meteorology dates back to ancient times, with the first book on the subject being written by Aristotle in 1350 BC. The book was called Meteorology, but the important thing is to not take one scientist at his word. Research things, people. Culminate a general consensus, and don't start freaking out at the first word of apocalypse is coming. But that's all I can tell you this week on the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. But I have enough time to thank you for listening to the show, and to ask you to please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Please subscribe to us on Speaker, leave us a review on iTunes, and for God's sake, have a good night.